How and why Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph became the King of Mexico. The Archduke's adventure in the New World, the spellbinding story of Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph's quest for the Mexican crown, and the challenges he faced along the way. Welcome to the 10-minute shorts. In today's episode, we're diving into the intriguing history of Mexico's monarchy. Join us as we uncover the fascinating story of how and why Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph became the King of Mexico. Princess Carlotta was overjoyed when she learned that Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. "Here, the mood is wonderful," she wrote to her husband, Mexico's Emperor Maximilian I from Mexico City. They believed that Lincoln's death would stop American opposition to their monarchy, but that was not to be. How an Australian Archduke and a Belgian princess married and became monarchs of Mexico in the 1860s is a tale of high drama and unbelievable twist that begins in France. Napoleon III, the emperor, had visions of a France-led Latin sphere of dominance in the New World. The phrase Latin America was originally used in the 1850s in Paris, and for certain people, it serves as an intellectual justification for these imperialistic goals. Many French philosophers thought the area, like the Catholic nations of southern Europe, was inherently suited to monarchy. Adolphe Thiers, a later French president, referred to the plan as madness without comparison since Don Quixote. The French fleet entered Mexico in 1862, intending to collect debts, but it soon became apparent that they had other goals. On April 19, 30,000 French soldiers invaded Mexico to depose the president and the country. Ferdinand Maximilian was the best candidate that Napoleon III could have discovered for the throne. He was the aspirational younger brother of the renowned Habsburg royal dynasty and the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. Maximilian, however, needed more chances to rule in Europe. His ambitious wife, Carlotta, motivated him to restore his family's prestige in the Americas. In 1519, Habsburg Emperor Charles V conquered Mexico for Spain. In the New World, what was simple to plan in Europe proved difficult. Benito Juarez was depicted as a despot by Mexico political exiles in Paris, who also suggested that Maximilian would be hailed as a liberator. But Juarez was supported by a sizable portion of Mexico, and on May 5, 1862, the French army was routed outside Puebla's walls, a day known as Cinco de Mayo. Napoleon III was persuaded to send reinforcements despite the defeat, rather than becoming discouraged. In June 1863, French troops invaded Mexico City and installed a puppet administration that declared Mexico an empire and demanded Maximilian take the throne. Whose hemisphere is it? This posed a serious obstacle for the U.S. and its Monroe Doctrine, which sought to limit European meddling in Latin America. However, the United States was split in two during the American Civil War and could not send soldiers to stop the French invasion. Lincoln also feared that France, in response to any unfriendly action, would either recognize the Confederacy or, even worse, intervene on its behalf. This gave the French a temporary advantage. Napoleon III persuaded Maximilian and Carlotta that Mexico had been pacified after Mexico City had been taken over. They found their empire had been destroyed by civil war when they came in May 1864. Expensive banquets and balls in Mexico City celebrated the splendor of Maximilian and Carlotta's new dominion, but Juarez aligned forces engaged in guerrilla warfare in the countryside. The French used severe counterinsurgency strategies. When communities were thought to be working with the empire's enemies, they were frequently burned down and tortured. Summary executions and torture were also frequent. He had fought an atrocious war, as one French commander remarked in a letter to his niece. "If I were Mexican, what animosity and suffering I would inflict on these French," he wrote. By 1865, Juarez had moved northward to avoid the French army and Maximilian's supporters. Chihuahua City on the U.S. border became his alternative capital. That appeared to be about to change in April 1865, when the American Civil War ended. The U.S. and all Latin American nations except Brazil had rejected Maximilian's dominion. Lincoln, however, felt unable to give Juarez more substantial help as long as the Confederacy persisted. Weapons were not allowed to enter Mexico because of an arms embargo, but Lincoln was expected to relax it. Carlotta was happy to see him killed for this reason. She and Maximilian thought Andrew Johnson, his successor, would acknowledge their rule. Maximilian sent a delegation to Washington to negotiate with Johnson, but his soldiers were disregarded. Instead, the only Mexican ambassador the Americans communicated with was Matos Romero, who was Juarez's agent. Romero also had a large address book. Ulysses S. Grant, a hero of the American Civil War, was one of his wealthy friends. Romero staged balls and opened banquets at the renowned Delmonico's restaurant in New York to put pressure on the American administration to avoid reaching a deal with France. One that Lincoln's son went to, the armaments embargo, was lifted under Johnson. Hence, it was successful. Supplies, cash, and men rushed across the border, in addition to 1,308 pairs of underwear and 813 frying pans. One American businessman alone sold Juarez's army 5,020 Enfield rifles, 1,000 handguns, 6 pieces of artillery, and 20,400 rounds of ammunition. Rescue at the border. Juarez's future was gloomy despite the flood of supplies. French General Auguste-Henri Brincourt led 2,500 men across northern Mexico in 1865. His goal was to capture Juarez or expel him from Mexico. Brincourt boasted arrogantly that it would be the last military act of French involvement. On August 15, 1865, Brincourt wrote to his uncle, "I am writing to you happily, sat on Citizen Juarez's presidential armchair. Chihuahua City was where we made our victorious entry yesterday, marking the conclusion of the Mexican conflict." But the conflict had yet to be won. Juarez had only made one more retreat to El Paso del Norte, just 55 miles north, but Brincourt was unable to follow him. Napoleon III had been frightened by Grant's inflammatory comments. The French emperor ordered Brincourt to stay in Mexico's interior to avoid border conflicts with the U.S. troops fearing war. In December 1865, the U.S. told Napoleon III that friendship between the two countries was attainable when France terminated its engagement in Mexico. Without French soldiers to defend the northern states, towns fell one by one to Juarez's fighters. Napoleon III withdrew the French soldiers from Mexico because Maximilian's realm was insolvent. He wrote to his protege after hearing the U.S. threat to inform him that the French would leave. The Mexican Second Empire had little prospect of succeeding without French financial and military help. As Juarez's supporters grew, Maximilian's government shrank. Napoleon III was unmoved when Carlotta went to Europe to plead for more men and resources. She never returned to Mexico after having a nervous breakdown while traveling to ask the Pope for Catholic assistance. Maximilian's administration failed in the face of a renewed nationalist movement without French support, similar to U.S.-backed regiments in the 20th and 21st centuries. Maximilian surrendered at Querétaro 2 months after the French left in March 1867. If blood must be shed, let it be only his, he begged his officers and friends. On June 19, 1867, he and 2 of his top generals were executed by firing squad. "I forgive everybody. I beg that everyone may also forgive me, and I wish that my blood, which is going to be spilled, may be for the good of the country," he said to his executioners in Spanish before his death. Long live independence. Long live Mexico. Juarez's struggle had preserved Mexico's Republican government. However, U.S. assistance also played a significant role, and Juarez wasn't shy about expressing his gratitude for it. He told a former Union officer who battled Maximilian's men that for Americans with no link to Mexico, to make every sacrifice and to suffer every hardship for the Republic was a spirit so sublime that it could not be put into language. Sadly, this spirit hasn't been seen much since. In October 2021, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador praised Washington for never recognizing Maximilian. We should hope that the cooperation between the two countries, seen in the 1860s, may be resurrected in the modern period amid a global pandemic, an ever-worsening climate disaster, and a plethora of other issues, not only in words, but in genuine action as well. That's all for today, folks. We hope you enjoyed this episode of 10-Minute Shorts. If you're interested in learning more about the rich history of Mexico, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious.